Life Yeti. How are you? Hope you're fine. This is the Shy Yeti Show.
Okay, where you go?
Why have I got horns?
Oh no.
Oh, it's the Shy Life Podcast.
Oh, there's going to be some drama ahead.
All I wanted was a pie, and then I hatched out of an egg.
Okay, bring the mic over. He's ready to record.
Is it metaphorical? Is it deep? Is it deep?
Boy, he's not all that shy, is right.
Blimey, Governor, it's the Shy Life Podcast.
Oh my goodness.
Hello, gentlemen.
700.
I don't know how we've done this.
20. 720. 720. 700.
Bonjour et bienvenue au podcast The Shy Life.
Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the Shy Life Podcast with me, Paul the Shy Yeti. How are you doing? I'm all right. So, what's this episode going to be about? Well, we've got a returning guest. We've got lots of twists and turns, and maybe a few big cliffhangers coming up. No, it's not an episode with Yeti Uncle John causing some trouble. We're going to be talking about a favourite TV show, but I'm going to run the theme music, and then when we come back, I shall reveal all, as it were, on that theme music.
Darling, it's the Shy Life Podcast.
Keep it rolling. Keep it rolling.
Yes, but it's a positive thing, Paul. The High Life, the Shy Life.
I'll go anywhere for a potato.
Delicious.
Hello, campers. How are you?
Oh,
Go Shy Yeti.
Oh, I hope he hasn't found out my secret. I think he has.
I love the Yeti test. It's my favorite thing.
If you thought that was bad, just listen to this.
Yeah, I am strangely drawn to Yeti Uncle John's ankles as well.
I could eat my body weight in crisps.
Has anyone seen my hot sausage?
It's all green and meaty and yum, 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 yum.
I don't think I'm ready to speak about it.
Here comes the grizzly.
Hi there.
It's the Shy Life Podcast.
I can't wait for it to begin.
I like that. Yeah.
Marvelous, Paul. Oh dear, I can't believe that old bag is still around.
Okay, listeners, here we are. So, can you guess who the special guest is? He's somebody very close in age to me. Yeah? Yes, it's Andy, Andy the birthday twin.
Hello, good afternoon. How are you?
Oh, I'm all right, thank you. How are you getting on?
I'm doing really well, thanks. Is it really it was our birthday when we spoke last time, wasn't
that's
it?
The last time, yeah. So, and it's already 3 or 4 months since then. So,
yeah, definitely.
And even more by the time this episode comes out. But,
yes, and since then I went to New York and went at the Empire State Building, and it was so cold up there and so cold and windy, but it was lovely. And then I went to Mexico.
Oh, did you find the message that I left you at the top of the Empire State Building? I tucked it in a crack.
Yes,
back in 2000 when I was there. I didn't even know you then, but I left you a little message.
So I've replied to that message, and I'm still deciding where to leave it, but I will leave it somewhere that I know you'll visit, and then you can get the reply to it.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah.
The mystery continues.
Yes, I was last in New York in 2000. So that's the only time I've been in New York. But what are we going to be discussing? Well, we're going to be discussing a show that we've mentioned before, an Australian series called Sons and Daughters, which ran from 1982 to 1987. Although there was some differences in when it was screened in Australia as to towards the end as to when it finished. It finished in different states at different times, didn't it? I think. But,
and there was a 970 episodes or something like that.
Yeah, and we got it in Britain. Again, sort of. Some of the regional TV stations started showing it not that long after it had started in Australia, and others were still showing it well into the 90s, which well, at least I think I finished watching it in about 92. That was when it was.
My memories of Sons and Daughters were quite early because I lived in the Midlands in England, and it started showing. I think maybe it was only a year old when it started. I think perhaps it started in February '83 in the Midlands, and because they showed 3 episodes a week, was it 4 times a week in Australia?
I'm not 100% sure. Something like that.
Because we had 3 episodes, it obviously wasn't being shown as quickly as it was out there, so it lasted a little bit longer on Central TV. But my memories of it are mainly earlier.
Because it was a 25-minute show, but again, I've heard that towards the end in Australia, it kind of show it less often. They made it into 50-minute episodes, and I don't know if you noticed, I think at least one of the episodes on the box set that's come out, there was one episode that was a 50-minute episode. So presumably because there's some damage to one or other of the 25-minute episode versions of that episode. I did make me wonder because I not long got rid of I kept all my videos of Sons and Daughters until I knew I had the DVDs, because if there was any problem, then I knew at least I could, the later stuff I had on video and could get them digitized if for some reason there was a delay. And I wish I had kept them now to see if I could have found, if I had the 25, I mean, they wouldn't have been good enough to put on a DVD, but it would have been interesting to have kept, or at least had a digital copy of those 2 episodes in the original format.
I think there was another one as well where the end credits are recreated. Maybe there was some tape damage and they had to because there's quite, and just for your listeners, all of it, the whole thing, the whole 970. Whatever it is, let's say 973. The whole 973 episodes are now available on DVD for us to buy. And there are bits of them where the tape quality is not as good, and you can see where they've joined in certain scenes that have been taken from maybe people's home videotapes. I spotted somewhere there was they'd got the Network 7 logo in the corner, and they tried to blank it out a bit for a couple of scenes.
Yeah, but by no means would, that going to spoil your viewing of it. We should give a sort of at least an overview of what the show's about. We've probably done this before, we've talked about it, but for those who may not have heard that episode, because we're going to do a specific thing this time. We'll come to that in a moment. So, how would you describe Sons and Daughters to somebody who's never seen it?
So it's a story about 2 families initially, isn't it? The Hamiltons and the Palmers. And the Hamiltons are quite wealthy and live in Sydney. And Gordon Hamilton is a rich businessman. You've got his wife, Patricia, and their children, Angela and Wayne. And they've lived quite an affluent life, business meetings. They've got a property several hundred miles away up in the country called Woombye. They live a very comfortable lifestyle. No hassles for them, really.
No.
And then you've got the Palmer family down in Melbourne, who is David and Beryl.
Yeah.
And they've got 3 children. They've got Kevin and Susan and John.
Yeah.
And they're a much more down-to-earth working class family. I think at the start, is David a trucker?
Yeah, he's certainly a trucker for most of the time.
And you've got I think their eldest son John, I think he's struggling a little bit with work and from one job to another, and I think the youngest son Kevin, I think he's still at school, isn't he, when it first starts?
Yeah, and he's got sort of wants to kind of be a journalist, or that's sort of certainly the way he's headed at the start anyway. So
we know right from episode 1 as viewers that there's a connection between these 2 families, in that back in the 1960s, David Palmer and Patricia, I mean, she's Patricia Hamilton now, were a young couple, and Patricia was pregnant, and we know that they turn up at this guest house that's run by a woman called Fiona, looking for somewhere to stay. She's heavily pregnant, goes into labour and gives birth to twins. And we also know that sometime after that Patricia and David separated, and Patricia took the daughter Angela, and Fiona brought up the little boy who was called John, and eventually John went to live with his father down in Melbourne with David, and by then David had married Beryl, and so you've got one twin in Sydney and one down in Melbourne, and I don't think the actual twins themselves aren't aware at the start, are they?
No.
So the whole premise of the first year of the show is them meeting and getting to interact with each other and learning about the fact they are brother and sister.
Because presumably, I can't quite remember though. Were they ever made aware that they do have? I don't think they even knew that they were twin. Because I mean, there's obviously the confusion that happens when they do meet and don't realize that they're related. But I don't know that either of them were ever brought up with the knowledge that there was another. That
they had a twin. No, I don't think they were.
Because they're not looking. Neither of them are looking for the missing brother or sister. So
there's reference in the first few episodes around them having some kind of psychic connection with each other. For example, Angela's involved in a kind of like a mini car crash, and John's aware that something's happening. He doesn't know to whom or what it's about, but he's just aware that something's wrong. And similarly, Angela has a really bad headache, and I think something's happened to John, hasn't it? And she has to go upstairs to lie down because she's just feeling out of sorts. So they've both got this psychic connection with each other.
There's another psychic connection that happens right near the end of the show with Patricia, for want of a better name, she's not called that by that stage, but she meets her sister, and there's a very notorious scene
where you sit staring at a photograph.
I don't know that that's a hark back to the early psychic connection, but
So I think another thing that's just worth adding as well. It was filmed mostly in Sydney, wasn't it? But they would fly the cast down to Melbourne, I think, for outdoor shots that were needed to be in Melbourne, and it was very much a point of trying to show it was in both cities, so that they could capture both TV markets.
Yeah, and I think what I like about it is, what I like about Australian soaps anyway, is that I think. My mum and I were talking about this, that UK soaps tend to be more working class backgrounds generally. American soap operas tend to be more upper class. At least all the famous ones like Dynasty and Dallas.
Affluent, wealthy people,
Whereas Australia always tends to be more in the middle ground, which might be why I always have that sort of connection, because I see it's more like perhaps the background that I'm familiar with.
And there's a mixture. There's a mixture.
In Sons and Daughters, there's a definite mixture. There is. It's one of. I think there are one or two others that went along the Dynasty route, but this is very much an Australian. That they're rich, but they're not Dynasty rich.
And they've still got friends that are living in perhaps not such good circumstances and struggling to make ends meet. And I think that's quite well explored in Sons and Daughters, that you might have someone, I think particularly when the boarding house comes into it, you've got people living there who, then if they're working, they're on really low incomes. But the owner of the building is one of their friends who's quite a wealthy business person. And I think you've got that kind of mixture, that it doesn't have to be separate lives just because you've got different wealth.
A character like Charlie is just, who is very well off, is just friends with everybody. So what we were going to do this episode, is discuss the season cliffhangers of the show, and how effective we think they are, which are our favourites. We'll probably talk about the build up to the cliffhangers I don't know how much we're going to give away as to how they resolved, because we don't want to. I know it's like 40 years ago, but
no spoilers.
No spoilers.
But we want people to watch it and enjoy it, and we don't want to give away too many of the twists. But one of the things you've got to be prepared for with Sons and Daughters is that the stories do twist and turn, and one week can be very different to the next.
But it's very fast moving. I found that when I was watching the box set, because when I first got the box sets, I had seen the first 200 episodes on YouTube, and then I'd seen the last 18 months or so, back most of it 30 years ago, and I hadn't really watched much of it. I think I'd watched the last 100 episodes because at some stage I had started watching it on YouTube. Then it all vanished, but I still found that this was before the DVDs came out. So there were some I'd not seen for a long time, and then there was a whole chunk in the middle from 200 to about mid 1985 episodes that I just had never seen. So it was really a lot of it was a big chunk of it that was completely new to me, and that's what the excitement was about the DVDs coming out, was that I finally get to see the series from beginning to end, and finally see all those episodes that I'd never seen before.
So shall we start with 1982? I'm so excited for this.
Yes, let's do it. So, where do we find ourselves at the end of the first season?
As we said, the first year has been about the two families getting to know each other, and by the end of the season, the twins have been through this. They're kind of attracted to each other, but know obviously because they're brother and sister that's not right, and they've felt a bit uncomfortable with that. And maybe part of some of that is them getting to know each other, but there is some kind of chemistry between them.
Yeah, because they were super interested in each other before they knew, and even now they do know, they
still feel
they're in that uncomfortable sort of how do we turn this into something.
And that's quite. I found that quite. It's quite a serious subject to be dealing with in kind of daytime soap opera, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and also about 10 years later, they did it in Neighbours, and those scenes kind of got edited because it was considered shocking in the early 90s that a plot line was sort of going along those lines.
But they'd already done it 10 years earlier.
But they'd already done it 10 years earlier, and it had been shown presumably without editing, hidden away in the afternoon schedules. But
so what they've decided to do, Angela has left Sydney. And she's gone down to Melbourne to live with her father David and his wife Beryl, and getting to know her half brother and half sister Kevin and Susan, and she's been really made kind of welcome by the family. And I think there's a thing about Angela's character in that she falls for Beryl's brother, and it's almost like you kind of get the feeling with Angela that is she just looking for a husband or a boyfriend. And there's something about the way that character was written. It's almost like trying to portray women as maybe needing a husband, or I don't know, or maybe she's just a bit confused. But you do get that sense that Angela seems to go from one boyfriend to the next. And I think there is some reference early on that previous to the show starting, she'd actually had quite a lot of boyfriends.
Yeah, because she was living in that sort of entitled sort of world of parties and rich friends with kids that they were kind of
so as the show starts, it's their 20th birthday, isn't it? So a year later, at the end of the season, it's their 21st birthday. So we've got Angela down in Melbourne living with David and Beryl, and is she married to Rob by then? So she's in a relationship with Beryl's younger brother, who's a bit closer to her age, isn't he, Rob?
Yeah, I can't remember if they're married at this stage or whether it's it has been.
It's still to come.
Yeah, it's still the news that Rob had a child with another
woman.
Yeah, Actually, looking at the synopsis, it does say Angela started a relationship with Beryl's younger brother Rob, and the two are married. So they are
right. They are married by that point.
Yeah.
And I think there's some reference to the fact that they've had trouble starting a family, and Angela's really keen to have a baby, and then has gone through discovering that her husband has actually already got a child that was a secret. So there's a lot of family secrets in this, and a lot of twists and turns.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what's happened to Angela in the first year. Meanwhile, John has kind of done the reverse, and he went up to Sydney initially to live with Gordon and with Patricia to get to know his mum.
Yeah.
And that hasn't gone down very well with Gordon's son Wayne, who it turns out Wayne is actually not Patricia's biological son, although he's been brought up.
Yeah.
Wayne and Angela are only step siblings. They're not really they're not kind of blood siblings, if that's the right phrase.
Wayne is the child of Gordon's first wife, who is also related to Rosie
the housekeeper.
The housekeeper, yeah. That's a really weird situation where
just as another twist,
you're employing your sister-in-law to be your house cleaner.
But in the meantime, Patricia and Gordon's marriage has collapsed, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Patricia's moved down to Melbourne and is now living in that big house.
Yeah.
I can't remember how did she end up with that house in Melbourne? Was that through some business deal with somebody?
Yeah, you don't see it. Well.
And John has followed her, and he's managing the company that they're all working for. He's like the manager for Melbourne, isn't he? Because there's this really awkward scene where they buy David's trucking company that he's working for, and this new boss turns up, and it's John, and it's like your son becomes your boss, which is a bit awkward for them, and that's. I thought they did that quite well.
David's a very proud sort of I'm the provider type thing, so it was a bit of a knock
to find his son as his boss is a bit. It's definitely like you say, like a knock to his pride. So everybody's kind of changed positions in this first year and living in different places to where they were before, and obviously it's coming up to the twins' 21st birthday party, which is going to be the main kind of scene for the end of season episode, isn't it?
And David and Patricia have had sparks. They've had more than sparks, haven't they?
Yes, they've had an affair, haven't they?
Yeah, but by this point, then that's kind of got fizzled out as well.
But as a result of that, Patricia and Gordon have separated. But Beryl's taken David back, hasn't she?
Yes, yeah.
So Patricia's living presumably not that far away from them, across town in this mansion house with John. And they're kind of living this sort of separate life. But it's been agreed for the 21st birthday that everybody would come together. And that, as you say, also includes Gordon has a housekeeper who manages the property that's up in... Is it Woombye, it's called?
Yes.
Place?
Yeah.
So everybody from Sydney and this Woombye place come down to Melbourne for this party. And they make a bit of a thing, I think, because Beryl and Rob's father turns up. Is it Doug?
Yes.
Oh, no, hang on. Is Doug David's father? It's Doug is David's father, isn't he?
Yeah, yeah.
And they make a bit of a thing about the two elderly characters. You've got old man Doug and then Rosie, who's obviously a bit older, and it's almost like trying to put them together. But there is a bit of chemistry between them, I think, like a bit of flirting or...
Yeah. Of course, Fiona is also... Fiona, who was there episode 1, had remained friends with Gordon on and off, and because she's got a bit of a dark past herself.
Yes.
But she's back on the scene because when John ran away from home in the very first episode, when he was framed for something, he went back to Fiona, and she came back into the story. So she's a regular member of the cast, and is kind of friends. She's friends with everybody, isn't she? With everybody, except for occasional things where there's like twists and turns in the plot, which mean they fall out for a few weeks. But Yeah, it's a lot. We'll come a bit more into some of Fiona's past
stories
in later seasons. So
you've got this big family get together, and kind of meanwhile while that's happening, because I do think Sons and Daughters is a lot about relationships between people. And typical soap opera style, Kevin Palmer, who's the youngest son in the Palmer household, has been in a relationship with the girl next door.
Yeah. who also fell pregnant.
She falls pregnant as well. So they end up, is it a bit of a shotgun wedding?
Yes, it is. But quite quickly she decides she wants to be a model and doesn't want the baby to sort of drag her into sort of, she suddenly realizes however old she is, 17, 18 or whatever. And my life's over if I'm sort of, so she does get an offer to do modelling and then tries to balance both, and that causes problems.
It does. And I think there's some really good episodes there because it is the early 1980s and it is exploring the role of women about should they be stay-at-home mums or is it okay for them to go out and work? And clearly in Sons and Daughters, you've got both. You've got Beryl, who's been, I suppose you could say, a traditional housewife in Melbourne, bringing up a family, and her husband is the breadwinner, and you've got Beryl's role, but then you've also got Patricia, who's been a big businesswoman, who she's kind of had her own career, and they're very different. And for Lynn, it's almost like she's a bit of both, and maybe wanting to. She's got her baby, and she loves Kevin, and she wants to kind of be the kind of the mother to the child, but she doesn't just want to do that on its own. And maybe that shows something about how attitudes were starting to change in the 80s.
Yeah. At this point, we're 174 episodes in. So, there has been a lot of twists and turns to get to this point.
I really like the premise that you've got David and Patricia, and you've got the two twins that they had all those years ago, and the fact that they've grown up separately and they've swapped them. And this is where the cliffhanger all comes in, isn't it, Paul? Because the whole premise of the first year has been around these two twins, that David is their father, Patricia is their mother. Patricia and David had this relationship years ago, and they're now with other people, and it's all been based on this, isn't it? And then right at the kind of birthday party, this is where it's a real rug puller moment, isn't it?
Because the only person not invited to the party is Patricia, because whatever sort of different the different relationships they've had, good and bad, throughout this season. At the moment, David and Patricia aren't friendly, and
nobody wants her there. Nobody wants her there. No. Gordon doesn't want her there. He's flown down from Sydney with Rosie. He doesn't want Patricia there because she's his ex-wife and she's a troublemaker. David and Beryl don't want her there because she's seen as the kind of the reason that their marriage was at risk. Kevin doesn't want her there because he can't stand her. So there's Patricia in her house, left on her own. And I think, does John kind of, obviously he's got to go because it's his party, and he sort of leaves his mum there and asks her, will she be all right? And gets the taxi over to the Palmer house, doesn't he?
And, she can't put up with it. So she comes over herself, although she never gets inside. And
for some reason, David's outside. I think, has he taken Lynn to her modelling job?
Yes, yeah.
So David comes back from dropping Lynn off and sees Patricia outside the house. So he's straight up to her and he was like, Patricia, you're not going in. You're not welcome. We don't want you there. Go away. You're not part of this. Sorry, go on.
I was just saying, but Patricia has her own bombshell, because at this point she reveals that when she first met David, she was already pregnant, and she pulled the wool over his eyes to have some sort of support, so that in fact David's not either John or Angela's father. That doesn't go down very well.
it's a pretty big cliffhanger. You've spent the whole of the last year getting entwined with this other family because these are your children, and for David to then find out actually they're not his children is a massive twist, isn't it? And what we're left with is David sort of threatens Patricia and says if she tries coming into the house, he'll flatten her.
Yeah.
He kind of pushes her. Does he push her to the ground or he pushes her away?
Slaps her.
She's left there sobbing in the street, and he kind of goes into the house, back into the party, and kind of looks around, and you've got this really awkward shot where he can obviously see both John and Angela, his children, but he's just realised they're not his children. And it's like, what a bombshell that the whole premise of the first year has been a lie. So that's kind of how it finishes.
Yeah, that's the end of season 1.
I thought it was a good ending to the first season. It wasn't what I was expecting the first time I saw it.
No, I mean, and even though it's very dramatic, it's almost one of the lower key end of seasons compared to how things go later on. But
shall we jump on to end of season 2 then?
Yeah, we're up to episode 352, which is the end of the 1983 season.
Things have really moved on, haven't they, in this year, in this second year of the show? We spend a lot of the year. We get to see who John and Angela's real father is. There's a whole raft of episodes with. Is he called Martin? With Martin in them, and he's got children of his own.
Yeah.
And to cut the long story short, Martin's the end of Martin is he's shot dead, isn't he? And David goes to prison for this.
Yeah. And he didn't shoot him. But Patricia holds back
the evidence, doesn't she?
Yeah. And so
we've had time with David in prison. We've had, and it's more John that gets to know his father, isn't he? Doesn't John join the army for a while as well?
Yeah. Was it Air Force?
Air Force.
Yeah, I think it's Air Force. He's not a very nice man. I don't really see. I mean, he might have been different when Patricia knew him, but he's as old-fashioned in a different way as David is. And
I think you're right. He doesn't come across as a very nice person, really, does he?
No.
Isn't there a scene where doesn't he try and drown his own son, or he's violent towards him?
There's a whole horrible plot line where a child gets drowned in their swimming pool, and
that's right.
And the son gets blamed for not fixing the lock on the swimming pool gate, and not at any point. Does anyone say, well, why were the next door neighbours letting their 3-year-old daughter wander around the streets? And it's like all of the blame is on this poor boy for not having fixed the. And
I kind of wanted to say to Martin, if you were that bothered about the gate not being fixed and your son's a bit lazy, why didn't you fix it yourself?
Yeah.
Have a bit of responsibility. Just barking orders at someone. And I know you've been in the Air Force and you're some kind of sergeant major, but if it's such a big deal not having this gate fixed, fix it yourself.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I felt sorry for the poor son.
Something else that's really been explored in this is Fiona's backstory, isn't it? And we know that she's been a sex worker during the war in Australia when the American would it be American Air Force men that would have been over in Sydney, and she's got this kind of history, and she'd actually got pregnant to this guy and had a baby, and it's quite a tragic story, really, because Fiona's version of the story is that she had a baby and sadly they both caught this flu virus and the baby died when he was only a few days old. And she's got this really heartbreaking memory of kind of losing her baby. And some of that's explained as to why she's so... when John is left with her, after David and Patricia go their separate ways in the 1960s, and Fiona starts to bring John up, that's kind of explained away as how Fiona's quite a motherly character because she didn't get a chance to bring up her own child. But again, there's a twist.
Yeah.
what we find out is that Fiona didn't lose her son. Well, she did lose him, but he didn't die. And actually her family decided that there was too much of a scandal, her being an unmarried mother, and Fiona was ill with the flu, but the family decided to actually adopt the child out while she was ill in bed.
Did they tell her that he died though? Because
yes.
there was the whole thing about
because there's a grave, isn't there?
Yeah, there was a grave, and then when they were doing work at Mumbai, there was all that plot line where they just kind of said, "Oh, trash! Just that we need to clear this land."
Graves get flattened, don't they?
And the graves get flattened, and then that causes problems between Gordon and because Patricia sort of does it to be deliberately hurtful. That's back in season 1, and now we're further down the down the path.
So rather than having lost a son, he's actually round the corner.
Yeah.
Living with another family, and he's called Terry. He's an interesting character because on the front of it, Terry's quite a likable character, and there's some really, I think, good scenes between him and Fiona, with him having to come to terms with the fact that he was actually adopted, and the people who've brought him up aren't his real parents, and that his real mother was Fiona, who was a prostitute, and it's quite difficult, I think, to him to accept that initially, but eventually they do sort of reconcile. But there's a bit of it's more than an uncomfortable story twist, isn't there? Because at this time, a lot of the action is kind of at the Mumbai estate, and there are rumours going around in the local town that there's a prostitute working at Mumbai. And there's a character that we've not really mentioned yet called Jill,
who's in it from the start, pretty much.
She's been in it from the start, and Jill has previously been a sex worker, but has kind of stopped that and has kind of rebuilt her life. And I think there's reference to her maybe being a drug user as well previously, but she's off the drugs. She's kind of cleaned everything up, and she's been living with Fiona.
And was very instrumental in that all sort of being a support for her.
And Jill, I think, has she got Jill a job at Mumbai or something? And then there's these rumours circulating in the village that there's a prostitute at Mumbai, and people put 2 and 2 together and assume it's Jill. So there's this really difficult scene where Terry, thinking that Jill is kind of an active prostitute, decides that he's going to commission her and kind of buy her time. Jill, of course, is horrified by this and immediately is like not having anything of it. But Terry overpowers her and actually rapes her, and that's really quite difficult episodes, I think.
Yeah, and because he's an otherwise likable character, it's confusing to know what they were kind of. Was that a deliberate thing, or did they perhaps not realise at that point that the character would stay longer? And so it's a bit of it's difficult not knowing the thoughts behind the creation of the character to know whether that was a deliberate thing.
I think for me, the bit that's a bit uncomfortable is it's almost like using rape as a plot twist to say, here's a character that we've introduced that we really want you to like, and we want you to enjoy the relationship that this young man is having with his mother that he's just found after all these years. And he's a really nice guy, but he's actually a rapist as well. And I just think I find that a little bit uncomfortable. That you would use rape as a plot twist, because the other implication of that then is Jill then finds she's pregnant. Clearly, Terry's the father, so you've got this dynamic that Fiona and Jill have been friends, an older woman and a younger woman, and the younger woman is now pregnant with the older woman's child, kind of going to be grandchild. So Jill's in trauma, isn't she? She's been raped. She's now pregnant and she's considering whether or not to go ahead with that pregnancy. So inevitably you've got that Jill wanting to terminate the pregnancy, and Fiona's position is that's my grandchild, and you can't end my grandchild's life.
Yeah. There are lots of changes with the personal relationships of a lot of the characters, like a number of characters completely married to different people. So Gordon's now married to Barbara, who was a neighbor of his. So his marriage is totally broken down with ended with Patricia.
And Patricia's got a clause into Barbara's brother.
Yeah, Stephen. I can't remember if they're married as well at this point.
They are, and we've had some really good episodes with Barbara and Stephen's mother, haven't we? Dee, who's a bit of an old battle axe.
Yeah,
and she's been like the family matriarch, hasn't she? And she's tried to boss everybody around. And I believe by this point, and I remember this from first watching it, because when the character dies, she's actually left a video will.
Yeah, yeah.
And I can remember watching that as like an 11-year-old, thinking that's fantastic. Someone's died, and at the will reading, they press play on the tape, and the video comes on, and she tells them all what she thinks of them, basically, doesn't she?
Yeah.
And I think, does she leave Beryl a load of money?
She does, yeah.
And you can see that a lot of them are furious at that.
And that also changes the dynamic between Beryl and David, because Beryl has some money and can, like offer to buy David a new vehicle, but David doesn't want to take money from his wife because he needs to be the one with money, and so that causes problems in their marriage later on.
One of the twists had been in this will reading that Stephen, who is now Patricia's husband, needed to have a male heir in order for him to inherit any money. And obviously by this point, Patricia and Stephen are, would you say, in their 40s? So maybe the likelihood of them having a child, although they kind of, at this point, someone in their 40s is too old to have a child, but quite quickly people in their 40s are having babies later on. But obviously Patricia doesn't want a child, so what are they going to do? And I think there's been some talk at this stage that maybe Stephen has a long lost child with somebody that he used to work with
Helen, and the child is called Andy, and he's a character that's in it right to the end of the show. I mean, long after his original connections are long since not mentioned anymore. But
and they seem to keep bringing him back, and he's always like a little bit different every time they bring him back, isn't he? It's almost like he's like a plot device to interact with other people, rather than have his own consistent story.
Yeah, so, somewhere towards the end, he almost become Wayne's
sidekick, doesn't he?
When Wayne is being particularly evil.
So we've got for this cliffhanger, we've got Fiona trying to stop Jill from having an abortion.
Yeah.
We've got Patricia being a bit skullduggery. She's found out that Helen's child, Andy, could be Stephen's son. And in fact, I think she's got a tape recording, and she's managed to record Helen admitting that Stephen is the father of Andy. And Patricia's like, well, we can contest the will now. Stephen, you've got a son, you've got an heir. And one of the terms of the will reading was that if you had a male heir, we could inherit the money. So I think something's gone wrong with their business, and they're about to kind of lose, or they've already lost their money. And this is a way of kind of getting some money back. And Stephen and Patricia's marriage has been a little bit rocky right from the start, really, hasn't it?
There's also another character we've not mentioned that kind of links in with the Martin character, Margaret, who is Patricia's sister, who was also had connections with Martin back in the day, and Margaret is still around, and she's got her eyes on. Well, she got her eyes on Stephen. She certainly got her eyes on anything going wrong with Patricia is a good thing, and she around this time she tries to run Patricia over in her car. There's
lots of shenanigans.
And then the big final plot strand is David and Beryl at Mumbai with Tony, and Tony is somebody who was David's cellmate when he was in jail, when he was wrongly imprisoned. And Tony's mother, Alice, is married to a guy called Joe, who is violent.
He's a psycho, isn't he? He's an absolute nutter. And this guy believes that David has been having an affair with his wife, and he's violent and really not a good person at all, is he?
Yeah. So Joe enters the property with a gun and
holds them hostage, doesn't he?
And holds Alice, Tony, and Beryl hostage. But Terry also arrives and walks into the middle of it, and then David arrives, and then
the gun goes off,
and you just see the outside of the house where you hear Beryl cry, "No, David!" and there's 4 shots, and that's the end of the season. But there's a lot going. It's a lot more plot strands than year one, but
than year one, and I kind of felt, although you're kind of involved in the plot strands at the time, a lot of them are forgettable in this season. I think it's almost like, I don't know, maybe Dallas had a Who Shot JR, so they decided to Who's Been Shot kind of cliffhanger. You guess it might be David from the fact that Beryl's cried out, "David, no!" But you just don't know, and it's like, who's actually been shot? Obviously, it was Joe that had the gun, and he's a minor character that's really only been in it for a couple of episodes. But you've got the relationship between David and Tony that have been in prison together, and that's almost like a father and son friendship, isn't it? In some ways, because Tony's a lot younger, and it was an interesting cliffhanger. I think series 2 is so different from series 1 because you're still overcoming this legacy of David isn't really the twins' father, and season 2 is very different because of that. You start to see new characters coming in, and characters that had got no connection in the first series, and it just plays out differently, doesn't it?
I mean, I can't exactly remember quite which episode they go, but certainly by season 3, the original David and Angela are no longer in the show. And the stories have completely moved away from the original sort of. I mean, you've still got the rivalries between the adults, but the actual a lot of the kids have departed the show or
left by this stage, haven't they? So that's the end of season 2, which is quite. I liked it as a cliffhanger, but we'll come back to it later, maybe. Yeah.
So by the end of 84. We're up to episode 528, so we're over halfway through the episodes. So
we've had season 3. We've had another kind of change in direction on the stories, haven't we? We've seen Patricia and David come back together.
Yeah.
Which I quite liked. That I thought that was an interesting development that they did kind of get back together. And we've seen another character, a father and son character, Roger Carlyle and his son. What's the son called again?
I can't remember.
And he's been killed, hasn't he?
Yeah.
And sort
Luke.
of Roger
Luke Carl,
that's it, Luke.
Yeah.
And Roger's determined that it's Patricia that's killed Luke.
Yeah.
Because it's the way it's set up. There's perhaps a few of them that could have killed him, but we actually know that it was the next door neighbour of the Palmers that killed him.
And the next door neighbour's family become a big part of the show. I've forgotten their family name, but there's a daughter and a son and
the husband and wife, and there's also the husband's brother, isn't there, who has a relationship with Beryl for a while. And I think that kind of because Beryl's with him, that kind of cements that David and Beryl aren't going to get back together. And I think really from then on, although there's maybe a little hint later on that David and Beryl could get back together, I think really from now, that's it for them, for the Palmer family, isn't it? They've gone their separate ways.
They do manage to have a very last-minute baby, though.
Yes.
But that's not this season, though. But
no.
This is the end of season 3 is the end of the Patricia era, although it does go slightly into season 4. It's not the end of the character, but yeah, Patricia is being threatened by Roger Carlyle, who believes that she killed Luke when she didn't.
And Roger's managed to get this doctor called Dr. Ross Newman under his control, hasn't he? Because is Ross a gambler? And Roger's offered to pay his debts off.
Yeah.
And I mean, again, another twist in the story. Barbara and Gordon have now separated. And Ross has begun this Dr. Newman has begun a relationship with Barbara. So everybody thinks Ross is a really nice guy.
He's the most oily character,
but he's not. He really isn't. And it's strange how we can see that, but none of the cast can, other than Patricia. And I think they've really kind of changed Patricia's character. She's become a lot more vulnerable and a lot more paranoid and neurotic. But actually, she was right. There was a plot to kill her.
I think I was a bit disappointed in season 3, as far as Patricia was concerned. She had a bit of a breakdown. She was off screen for quite a while, and I think having not seen season 3 at the time, I was thinking, oh well, this is the last season of her, but she's going to be in it quite a lot. Then, because I knew she was going to leave, I was kind of a bit disappointed that there was such a gap in the season where she wasn't in it, and then she came back for her final stint, sort of thing. But
and she's really quite fragile when she marries David and she finally becomes, after 20 odd years, and he forgives her for the lie about the twins not being his. I mean, I'm not sure I could do that if I was David, but he does forgive her. Clearly, he still loves her, and he marries her. Yeah. And she's had some knee injury, and she's due to go for knee surgery.
It's probably all the running away from Roger Carlyle's heavy,
or her sister trying to drive her car at her. So Patricia's due for knee surgery, and she's got guess who the surgeon's going to be? It's this Dr. Newman, who is being controlled by Roger Carlyle, who I think initially starts offering to pay off Dr. Newman's debts, but quite quickly it becomes if you don't kill her, then I'm going to kill you kind of scenario, which seemed a bit far-fetched, really. And we're left with Patricia due to go into surgery, fearing that she's going to be killed on the operating table by Dr. Ross Newman. Another kind of character that's emerged has been a couple of characters. We've seen Irene and Karen.
Yeah.
Both come into the show, and you really like Irene, don't you?
Yeah, Irene's a doctor, and she has sort of she likes David, and she's very plain speaking, and she's sort of woman who go down the pub and have a pint with you, and so David and Irene get on well, but Irene kind of also likes David,
and he just can't see it, can he?
No, he just sees her as a mate,
and that's quite, I think that was done quite well, because she's confiding in other people that she loves David, but she can see that he's not interested in her and he's still in love with Patricia, and she almost puts her feelings to one side, doesn't she?
Yeah.
Which I thought was quite interesting. Families are so complicated in this program, because Irene has a son who then it turns out has a terminal illness and has only got a few episodes to live, and he's been living with his stepmother and father. You don't really see the father very much, do you? Because is he away on, I don't know, is he a doctor as well, and he's doing some surgery over in Europe or something? But you've basically got Todd, who is Irene's son, living with Karen, his mother-in-law.
Yeah.
And Karen and Dr. Fisher have a bit of an odd relationship. I think it's an open relationship where they see other people. So he's away doing some surgery somewhere, who knows where. And Karen actually starts having a relationship with Wayne, Gordon's son. And that's been an on and off thing, hasn't it?
Yeah. It's much more what we've missed. That's only because they haven't really been involved in the end of season cliffhangers. But Wayne was married to another character who's since left, who was Stephen's daughter.
Yes, Amanda.
But we've sort of missed out on her because she wasn't involved in season cliffhangers. But
so season 3, I think, is a bit messy, because you've got, as we said, you've got the characters of Amanda, and then there's her mother Caroline and Stephen, who was their father, and he's married to Patricia for a while, and they kind of leave Caroline in it, don't they? After Stephen leaves, and
because you don't see Caroline. You see her daughter before you see Caroline. Then Caroline becomes a very big part of it. But
she does, doesn't she? But it's almost. I think, like you said with Andy, they kind of forget the original reason why they've brought them into it and keep them as a character. But I think it works much better with Caroline than it does with Andy.
Yeah.
So we've got this scenario where we've got Patricia about to go in for surgery, thinking that she's going to be murdered on the operating table. Everybody telling her that she's hysterical and that's nonsense. But we know it's true, that it will actually happen. Yeah. You've got Karen and Wayne in a relationship, and that's kind of an ongoing thing. Meanwhile, sorry, go on.
Sorry, I say Karen's being blackmailed by a character called Mitch, who looks like he's a Terry replacement, basically.
He does, doesn't he? He's got the same mustache.
He handed it over. And so Mitch is blackmailing Karen, and
he arrives to come and get the money, doesn't he? Yeah. And then Wayne arrives, and they have a huge argument, and there's a punch up between them, and Mitch gets thumped, falls, and he bangs his head on the edge of the coffee table or something, and then ends up unconscious on the floor. And Karen checks his pulse, and oh my goodness, you've killed him. So we've got this. Has Wayne actually killed somebody? Kind of thing going on. So that's part of the cliffhanger. Is Mitch alive or dead? I think the character Mitch, and I think this is the second time we've seen a cliffhanger. There's a lot of focus on quite minor characters. They've been in it for a while, but they're quite forgettable because they're not in the next series as much.
Because Karen's quite a popular character, but she's only in it for less than 100 episodes. It's a bit like, I mean, the beginning of season 4, it's like they're trying to find a replacement for Patricia as a female baddie. And there's one or two people the characters that come into it, and then ultimately they go down a different route. I don't know how much in advance this was all planned, but
the only bit that we've not mentioned for the end of season 3 is Fiona's been knocking around with Mitch's sergeant, a guy called Barney, and he's written some memoirs, hasn't he, about his time in the army?
Yeah.
And Fiona's offered to publish them, and I must admit, when I watched this, it felt a bit. It's a bit of a strange storyline because in the memoirs, Barney admits that he actually killed people, and he's actually responsible for the death of civilians. And Fiona goes ahead and publishes the book because that was his wishes.
Yeah,
but I just find that a little bit strange.
And then there's also more plot that comes off of that as well. But
from a guy who feels he's been slandered in the memoirs and comes back to basically murder Fiona because, in his eyes, she's ruined his life by naming him as a person that was involved in this. And I think kind of setup.
And I think behind the scenes they had to change the name of the character,
didn't they?
Because it was a weird sort of overdubbing where they changed the name slightly of presumably there was a real person with this name, and it had to be changed, but it all looks rather odd because the mouths don't quite go right. Anyway,
and I think it's not just his name, but isn't it the place where he's from as well, or something? Yeah. They kind of changed the name or something of the town that he'd come from. But I feel this end of season's a bit messy. This one,
and I think the last shot is Patricia going into theatre
for a knee surgery,
knowing that Dr. Ross is going to perform the surgery, and that he is working for Roger Carlyle, who's played by, I don't know the name of the actor, but he's a very strong actor, and he was in Prisoner as well, wasn't he?
It's Les Damon, and you're right. It was in Prisoner. He played one of the male prisoners, didn't he? When they brought the 3 men in.
Yeah, he was more sympathetic in Prisoner. But,
that's the end of season 3, and it's perhaps just worth adding that Patricia doesn't die on the operating table because at the last minute Irene decides that she's going to supervise the operation, so Ross can't kill Patricia. So how is he going to deal with Roger Carlyle? Who knows? But kind of Roger's pursuit of Patricia means that she just feels that she needs to leave. So she gets on a plane and flies off to Brazil. And when she's actually on the plane and she's kind of run away, she's sat next to this guy, isn't she?
Mm.
And is he the one that she then has a bit of a relationship with over in Brazil? But he turns out to be a bit of a difficult person, and she ends up trying to run from him. And there's all kind of stuff gone on, isn't there? So that is essentially the end of Patricia.
Yeah, we only see her for about a week or so's worth of episodes before she goes off. Because she's married to David, she kind of sort of says goodbye to him, but.
So there's quite a long gap, isn't there, in this season? This is season 4 now, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, 1985.
So the cliffhanger is episode 696, and things have really moved on because Patricia's gone to Brazil. David and Fiona go and look for her, but can't find her. But there's some shenanigans going on at this clinic where this woman had been brought in who'd been beaten up, supposedly by this man that she was in a relationship with, and the beating's been so bad that she's needed plastic surgery. And we get a scene where we see a woman covered in bandages, and does the doctor say something like, with the bruising, we will be able to, we should be able to reconstruct your face. And the voice, which is nothing like Patricia, says something like, "I don't want to look the same anymore. Make me look completely different."
By this season, we've got Caroline as a regular, and initially she's involved with looking for her daughter. For Amanda, but then her other daughter is in it. Who's her second daughter?
Samantha.
Samantha, yeah. Yeah. I mean, looking at the synopsis, there's so much that's changed again.
I mean, I know we haven't really mentioned Amanda and Samantha and Caroline that much because, as you say, they're not really. They don't really tend to be involved in the cliffhangers so much, but they were very popular characters, weren't they? And Amanda is the character that we see first, and she's, as you said, married to Wayne for a while, and then her mother comes into it, which is Caroline, and we kind of learn that Caroline is obviously Stephen's ex-wife, and kind of that drags on for a little bit, and I always wondered, do you think they maybe brought Samantha in? Because obviously it's not that long before Amanda leaves, is it?
No, there's a crossover.
It was almost like a replacement. They brought the other sister in because there isn't actually that many episodes with all three of them in it together. No. The mother and the two daughters. It's almost like the one daughter had given a notice. So rather than bringing another actress to play the same character, they thought, well, we'll write her out and we'll bring in her younger sister.
I've always kind of preferred Samantha. I don't know why. I'm not sure. I don't think I ever really warmed to Amanda as much as I did to Samantha. And Samantha doesn't stay in it for terribly long.
Samantha's a strong character as well, isn't she? She doesn't. I think there's bits where we maybe see a more vulnerable side to Amanda, which Samantha doesn't seem to have. She seems to be a lot more. She knows her own mind more, doesn't she?
Yeah.
So David's bought a house and is running a market garden from that house. And things are definitely over with him and Beryl because she's taken up a relationship with this guy called Rod, who I think he's one of the sleaziest characters in the whole programme. He's dreadful, isn't he?
He makes David look really sort of modern.
What on earth did Beryl see in him? There's just nothing. I just can't find anything about Rod at all that why you would want to be with him. He's obnoxious. He's sexist.
And he's got a housekeeper who's played by a murderer from Prisoner Cerebral Cage.
Yes,
Doris.
Doris. The shenanigans between Beryl and Rod have dragged on for some time, haven't they? And it's been an on-off relationship. And basically, in the cliffhanger episode this year, Beryl confronts Rod and says that she's aware that a few weeks previously Rod had slept with Doris, the housekeeper. And she's, this is obviously a big issue because they were supposed to be in a relationship, and here he is sleeping with his housekeeper. So, what's going on? And he apologizes, and he says it was a mistake, and he didn't mean it, and blah blah blah. And I can't believe Beryl kind of falls for it. He blames it on Doris and says it's Doris causing trouble. And you think, well, he's just admitted he slept with her. It takes two to do that, doesn't it? You can't just blame it all on Doris.
The neighbour Charlie, who we mentioned briefly, he was in it from the start, but with much less sort of regular recurrence. She's now a regular, and her son and daughter. She was a character who was referenced as having no children, who then a few years later turned out to have
Suddenly
two children.
Suddenly has them.
And there's a whole plot line which again we've missed with a character called Lee, who sort of promises towards the end of Patricia's time. Patricia sort of employs her to kind of keep an eye on things and to try and cause as much trouble for the people that have caused her trouble.
Lee is David's niece, isn't she?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And Lee is in a relationship with Charlie's son, who's a policeman. But that all takes place over season 4, pretty much, or the end of season 3.
And I've got to just say, Paul, one of the worst storylines I've ever seen in Sons and Daughters takes place in this season. So we did say that things were over between David and Beryl, but they had tried initially to get back together for a couple of weeks, and it hadn't worked. But then Beryl finds she's pregnant. But even though she's pregnant, she doesn't want to. And she wants the baby, but she doesn't want David back, and is quite happy bringing baby Robert up on her own. But there's this really dreadful story where Robert is kidnapped, and Beryl knows he's been kidnapped, but nobody. It's just awful the way that people treat her, and nobody believes her. Or do they? No, hang on, I've got that wrong. They think the baby's dead, don't they?
Yeah. It's very twisty turvy, and the baby Robert ends up getting adopted or fostered by the next door neighbours, and there's all tragedy in their story as well. Where people have died in their family, which it's a mess.
and for me, some of the worst scenes. And I mean, maybe this means it's really well acted, but I think it's quite clumsily written. Beryl has told that her baby has died, but she knows he's not dead, and she knows that baby that's being adopted by the next door neighbours is her child, and nobody will listen to her. And I just think, to see, you've gone through the grief of kind of losing a child and then finding out that he's not dead, because actually it was your ex-husband's niece that kidnapped her, and made it look like the baby had died. I just thought that was awful. Poor Beryl to go through that after all she's been through. She then loses a child, and then nobody will believe her that the child's still alive. That must be awful. I don't know how as a character you would put up with that.
Are we now at the stage though where she's got Robert back full time?
She's got Robert back now, yeah.
And another character that's important is Alison, who is...
Tell us who Alison is.
Alison is really Patricia, but with a facelift, and more than a facelift, she's taller and
different accent,
different build. But I love Alison.
Is she one of your favourites?
She's one of my favourites. I think she does things. They do things with her character, Alison, that I can't imagine them doing with Patricia, because Patricia was quite a cold fish, really. She wasn't. I mean, Alison and Charlie are like best pals, although Alison is constantly, putting
she pushes
Charlie,
it. She pushes
really
it,
pushed it. But I don't think they were ever that close when she was Patricia, because I don't think Patricia wanted to be anyone's friend much. But
one of the differences I think between Alison and Patricia is it's interesting that you've said that you think Patricia's quite cold. Patricia's quite vulnerable as well. And actually, I think what you do see in some of the early series when she has a breakdown, she's actually quite a vulnerable person. And a lot of this tough businesswoman bitch kind of character, it's a facade, and actually underneath it all she is insecure and she is scared and she is quite not weak, but she's quite she's had a lot of trauma in her life maybe, and feels quite she's quite a sad person, whereas Alison seems a lot more confident and a lot more outgoing and a lot more positive, and it's almost like she's not just had plastic surgery, she's almost like gained a bit of confidence with it.
Yeah, I mean, and this is where Caroline comes in as being such a good Alison and Caroline just work really well together as rivals, and not always as rivals. Sometimes they are working against together against Wayne. It's interesting, sort of how the dynamics can change. But
another character that's come into this series, which I think the casting wasn't quite right, and I'm not saying that she's a bad actress because it's actually Barry Humphrey's daughter, isn't it?
That's right.
But the character of Mary is a really strange character in that we meet this girl who lives, and it's always in this Wumbai area, isn't it, where kind of people are.
Yeah. And
we meet this character of Mary who I don't think she can read, and she's maybe not the brightest button. But what we essentially find out is that during Gordon and Patricia's marriage, when they were bringing up his son Wayne and her daughter Angela, Patricia actually found herself pregnant. And rather than admit to Gordon that she was pregnant with his child, she decided to disappear for a few months and have the baby away and kind of get it adopted out rather than have it as part of their family. Now that's a bit strange, isn't it?
Yeah, this is Mary. Is the
and I don't think we really ever get the full reason why Patricia didn't want to have Mary, why she gave her away and put her up for adoption, why she didn't want Gordon to know that she was having his child, because surely a third child would have cemented their marriage and it would have made things better between them.
Yeah.
Because they both had a child of their own, and then there would have been a third child that was kind of Mary, that was both their daughter. But basically Mary's been brought up by another family, and she comes into it, and she's not an unlikable character, but she's very timid and she's very short. And I think the scenes with her and Gordon where they're both unaware that they're father and daughter, they don't look anything like each other. He's 6'5" and she's 5 foot nothing. And there just doesn't. It's like Mary's nothing like Patricia, but she's nothing like Gordon either. And I don't just mean physically. As a character, she's nothing like either of them. She's not got their dynamism or their the kind of strength of character. And I just think the whole kind of character of Mary is a bit weird. Isn't she brought in as like a bit of a housekeeper stroke nurse for Gordon?
Yes. There's been all sorts of things going on with Gordon in the season with heart attacks.
His health's not been good, has it? He's had a few heart attacks.
There was that other woman who came in and fell in love with him, and who was with so many twists and turns. My poor brain, but Gordon's had a bad year of it. And
I think as well, by this point in the show, Wayne is a lot of things, but what we're really clear about is that he's actually quite lonely and he just wants a wife or a girlfriend, doesn't he? Not one that's going to rip him off, not one that's just out for what she can get. He wants somebody who genuinely will love him back, and the relationship that starts to develop between Wayne and Mary kind of gives him that. And because nobody knows the true dynamics of the biological relationships between them, Wayne and Mary start having a relationship. But because is she quite old fashioned and she won't sleep with him, or or he doesn't push that because she's from quite a traditional family, and I think there's expectations that there won't be any hanky panky until after they're married. That's quite clear, isn't it? So you've got all that going on. Meanwhile, at the same time, because Patricia is now Alison, and Alison is pretending that she's a completely different character, because let's not forget, Patricia left because she was being blamed, she was being framed for murder that she hadn't actually committed. So part of her coming back as Alison is that Patricia's dead, or Patricia's in Brazil, and this is a completely different character called Alison.
But if the police found out that Alison was Patricia, she'd still be in trouble because it was never resolved.
So Alison needs to keep her nose clean because they'll have Patricia's fingerprints on file, and if Alison ever has to give her fingerprints for anything,
one of the few things that apparently did
game will be up. So Alison is the only one that knows that this relationship between Wayne and Mary has to be stopped because they are brother and sister. Now, maybe they're just repeating a storyline here, but it is done in a very different way, isn't it? The whole brother-sister thing. There's clearly some connection between them, but I also found it quite strange that would Wayne really be interested in someone as timid as Mary?
Yeah, I mean, there was that previous relationship he had with, as I say, that woman who did come in to help Gordon, who then turned out to be in love with Gordon. But so he's a bit burnt with some of his recent relationships. So perhaps is looking for a completely different type of woman who's a lot more less conniving, and so he's very vulnerable at this point.
We've got Wayne about to marry Mary, and Barbara and Gordon are back together by now at this point in the story, aren't they?
Yeah.
So they decide to go to a place called Brolga to have the wedding.
Yeah.
So they've all driven up there for the wedding, and obviously Alison is like, I've got to stop this wedding. I can't let my daughter marry Gordon's son because Gordon is the father of both of them, and it would be an incestuous wedding. So it would be an incestuous relationship. So she has to pretend that she knows because of her friendship with Patricia in Brazil, because this is the other twist that Alison has emerged from Brazil, pretending to be that she kind of knew her in the hospital. But it's actually the same character, obviously. And we know that, and we've known that from day one. As soon as Alison arrives, we've known that this is actually Patricia, a different actress playing her after plastic surgery. So she decides that she's kind of got to stop this wedding. And the only way that she can do that, Gordon's brother James has come into the story by now, and he's a bit of a rogue, isn't he? Is he like a diamond smuggler or something?
He's a real Australian.
So he's got a light aircraft, and he can fly them to this Brolga place to kind of stop the wedding.
There's been a bit of a sort of flirtation between Caroline and James, and and I can't remember if at this point Alison likes James or whether that comes later, but
there's definitely a bit of rivalry between them, isn't there? Between Alison and Caroline over Gordon's brother James, and that kind of plays off. And I think that's the reason why Caroline's around, isn't it? Because she's sort of flirting with James, and she's with him. And then Alison arrives and says, is your plane ready to fly? We need to, you need to help me. You need to help me stop this wedding.
Yeah.
Because I think by now, does James know that Alison is really Patricia?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether it's more that something that sort of comes out.
Sometimes it's hard to keep up with who knows, isn't it? Because we've known from the start that Alison is Patricia. Different characters have known at different times, haven't they?
Yeah. And also, after they do fly off, Caroline's involved where one of James's associates knows that he's concealing opals on the property, and Caroline ends up getting locked in a cupboard, and she's got claustrophobia. So that's one of the strands of the end of the episode. Of the end of
will she survive?
Yeah.
And the reason she's in the house is because she's kind of flirting with James, isn't she? And then he takes Alison to fly off to stop this wedding, and she's kind of left in the big house when his mate turns up for the opals. So we've got her, as you say, locked away under the stairs in some kind of cupboard under the stairs.
But we've also got the plot line where Fiona's been ill, and Irene has to break it to her that she's got cancer,
which is quite emotional, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think don't we know that the actress that played Fiona had actually developed cancer by this stage and was quite poorly. And I think when you watch these episodes from the end of 1985, you can see that the actress is quite poorly looking.
Yeah, she did make it to the end of the show, but not much longer after the show.
And in the story, eventually she's cured of her cancer, isn't she? But I think in real life, she wasn't. So Fiona's been diagnosed with cancer. We've got. Sorry, go on.
We've got Doris, the housekeeper.
Yes.
Sort of almost holding Robert hostage, Bell's baby hostage, and it looks like she's going to smother him.
That's right.
Beryl can't get in to save her.
If we just rewind to where we were before, Beryl confronts Rod to say that she knows that he slept with Doris. He blames Doris and kind of makes it up with Beryl, and then storms off back home and sacks Doris and says, right, you know, here's a month's salary, clear off. You've caused too much trouble for me. You've nearly wrecked my relationship with Beryl. You're out. So Doris walks out and has quite a sad goodbye with Rod's daughter, who is actually Jane from Neighbours.
Jane from Neighbours, the wonderful Annie Jones. Yeah.
Which I thought was quite interesting to see her in kind of playing a similar character, maybe.
Just a few months before Neighbours started.
Yeah, literally just before then. So Doris obviously is furious. And this is obviously what tips her over the edge. She's been in love with her boss for years. He's got this other woman, Beryl, and now she's lost her job. So she, as you say, storms round to the Palmer house, and there's an altercation between Doris and Beryl. And as you've said, it ends up with Beryl being shoved out the front door, and Doris is about to smother the baby.
Yeah. And then, meanwhile, in the aircraft, the wedding is taking place, and the aircraft doesn't have enough petrol and or fuel, and begins to crash with Alison and James on board still.
So there's a lot going on here, isn't there? You've got Alison and James about to crash, Caroline locked away under the stairs, Fiona's just been given a cancer diagnosis, and baby Robert's about to be smothered. So it's almost like every character story is they're really on the edge at this one, aren't they?
Yeah.
So that's the end of 1985, episode 696.
Yeah.
If we jump on them,
then we're on to season 6.
So again, as always, there's a lot of new characters coming in the next series, and we're introduced to two quite significant characters called Glenn and Ginny. And Glenn is a strange character because he just turns up one day wanting work, and I think it's Charlie that takes him on as a gardener. And I actually Googled him, and I think he was some kind of mid-1980s male model stroke hunk. And I think by this stage, maybe the viewing figures had started to decline a bit, so they decided to bring in Glenn's character to maybe bring a bit of interest back into the show in terms of being a handsome character.
He is very easy on the eye, and I don't think I think he does a pretty good job. Really, I like Glenn, and I think he gets better as I think his acting.
It got better, didn't it? And there's a bit of a twist at the end of his storyline. There's a bit of a twist in that he's not quite who you thought he was.
Yeah. And he has some scenes with Caroline. I think perhaps having plot with her as well. Perhaps he gets to do quite a lot initially. But sorry, you.
So that's Glenn, and we've also met a girl called Ginny, and in this series, Alison's been involved in a car crash where Barbara has sort of life-changing injuries, and as a result of that, Barbara and Gordon's marriage breaks down because Barbara's quite disfigured facially from this car crash. Again, there's a bit of a hole in the plot here because, let me get this right, interrupt me if I've got this wrong. Alison was driving and Caroline was in the passenger seat, and they're having a furious argument between the two of them, and they're kind of leaving the Hamilton house in the car.
I think Caroline was
it Caroline that was driving?
No, I think Caroline was a bit drunk, though.
Caroline was drunk
because she was sort of wrestling the wheel off. So because I would say that she had some responsibility for that crash, even though she wasn't the driver. But
yeah. So meanwhile, at the same time, Gordon and Barbara are coming up the driveway and just see this car thundering towards them. So an awful crash happens. Barbara's left. I think she's thrown out of the car window because she was the driver, horrifically injured. Gordon's injured as well. The only one who doesn't really seem to be injured is Alison. I think Caroline's knocked out as well. And as Paul said, she was already drunk. So Alison decides to do a bit of a sneaky one and pulls Caroline across into the driver's seat and does a runner.
Yeah.
So by the time the emergency services get there, you've got Caroline at the driving seat of the car, and she is ultimately blamed for the car crash having happened.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's this interesting story and it gets dragged out for quite a while, where Caroline has to go to trial for causing this car crash that's left Barbara so injured, but they're all still friends with each other.
But Barbara and Irene are characters that leave quite suddenly, because there was a bit of a change of behind the scenes. So ultimately Barbara's leaving is a little bit sort of...
It's a bit sudden, isn't it?
Yeah, a little bit contrived.
And I found it a bit strange that Barbara and Gordon split up and then get back together, only for them to split up again when they've had this car crash and Barbara can't cope with the way she looks. And I just...
Well, doesn't Gordon lose his memory as well?
Yes, he's lost his memory. And that's a bit strange because they're all full of, we can't tell Gordon that Barbara's really his wife because that could put a strain on his heart if he got a shock and found out that he wasn't married to her. And I just think, this is his wife. Surely, if someone lost their memory in a car crash, I think you'd still have to tell them that their wife was okay. And even if he couldn't remember that she was his wife, I think you'd still have a duty to break the news to him in some way. But this is what they've decided, obviously, in the storyline, that Gordon can't be told that Barbara is his wife. Meanwhile, she just feels distraught because of her injuries and decides to leave. It feels like it's unresolved, and within 2 or 3 episodes, the Barbara character, who's pretty much been in it from near the start, is just gone, never seen again. And similarly, the other character of Irene goes as well. We're then left with Alison and Caroline, and I think there's a bit of a twist where people start to realise actually it was Alison that was driving the car and not Caroline. And I think eventually that does come out. What's never explained is why, when they both go to trial, Caroline gets a jail sentence for not driving the car, but maybe causing the crash. But Alison, who actually was driving and actually tried to make out that she wasn't even involved, surely she should have ended up with a harsher sentence because she fled the scene. But she actually just gets probation. And this is where she meets the character of Ginny. Who's a young girl who's on
is this
on probation with her.
Is this now after the fact that the whole Roger Carlyle thing's been sorted? Because there is a point where she gets her fingerprints are taken and the police come arrest her. And
they manage to get this resolved, don't they? That she didn't do it.
Yeah,
I can't remember how. Can you?
It's
because obviously the character that did kill Luke Carlyle, he dies himself in a house fire, doesn't he? Shortly afterwards, because he's got a drink problem and falls asleep while he's drunk, and the house burns down. But anyway, Alison is cleared of killing Roger. and just gets a very community service style probation sentence, which is where she meets Ginny. And Ginny's this young girl that's a bit lost, a bit of a street kid. Yeah. She's into fashion designing. She lives on a bus rather than in a house.
A bit Madonna-y. Sort of.
And I do think with both Glenn and Ginny, maybe that was the producers trying to bring in younger, maybe more glamorous characters that viewers would connect with and maybe feel a bit of to try and spice things up a bit.
Yeah, because this is sort of, by now I'm definitely been watching for a while, and Glenn and Ginny I liked a lot at the time. So
very popular characters. Meanwhile, this little boy called Tick has come into it, hasn't he? And there's a bit of shenanigans going on, and I think, is it Alison that tries to convince Wayne that Tick is actually his real child?
Yeah, she pays somebody that Wayne knew years ago to say that
when they slept together, she got pregnant and kind of had a child. So Wayne initially believes that Tick is his child, and I think even when it's revealed that Tick isn't his son, he still has a bit of a connection with him because, let's be honest, Wayne's lonely, and having a son is something that I think he really wanted. I don't think Tick's circumstances are very good. Is he in a children's home or something?
Yes. Yeah. So
the two both provide that father-son role for each other.
And Wayne sort of says that he would adopt him even when he finds out the truth and things.
So at the same time, Wayne has things have moved on in terms of the business world, because we've got these lovely scenes with the gym where they're all in kind of gym kit and all trying to get healthy, and there's all this 80s background music on and people in leotards and sports clothes. And also the computer age, because Wayne has a computer and there's some computer files that are hidden that Wayne has put them into his safe. And these computer files reveal that Wayne has actually swindled, I think, is it Charlie, into buying into the gym?
Yeah.
He's ripped her off. Yeah, and all this is on this confidential floppy disk.
Because the gym and the boarding house are the two main new locations. Boarding house is being run by Fiona, and she's living with her niece Janice, who is extremely religious. And they start off really being sort of loggerheads because they're very different, but end up sort of over a period of months or so beginning to sort of grow much closer.
And we have a really funny scene, don't we, where Janice goes from being this conservative, frumpy, religious character. She's persuaded to go on a date, gets horrendously drunk, and Aunt Fiona has to rescue her and finds her kind of naked in a hotel room in bed.
Yeah. Henry from Neighbours, but we don't know.
End of 1986, episode 868. We've got the characters of Glenn and Ginny, and Wayne and this little boy Tick end up stranded on an island. And Alison has manoeuvred this into position by arranging for them to be stranded on this island so that she can break into basically Wayne's house and try and find some evidence that Charlie has been ripped off by the sale of this gym. As I said, things have moved on, and we've got basic computers now with floppy disks. So I think Wayne has got all his information on floppy disks, and he's put them in the safe. And he actually says to Alison, if you try and get these, if you try and break in and kind of try and find the information, you'll bite off more than you can chew. While I'm away, if you try and come into the house and break into the safe. So there's a bit of a hint there that he's kind of done something to set her up.
Yeah. There are also some other characters, but we've still got Andy, but we've got Craig and Debbie, who are sort of couple who are sort of friendly with Beryl or David, various sort of that side of the series. Am
I right that Craig comes into it because he believes that Beryl is his mother?
Yes.
But it's actually Leela Hayes playing another role of quite quite a scornful character called Ruby, who's the complete opposite of Beryl. That must have been quite fun for Leela to play the two characters. I don't think. Do they have any scenes together? There's perhaps maybe one or two scenes where they are both together, where you've got that great shot of one of them from the back of the head, and it's somebody with a Beryl wig on talking to them. It's quite funny how they've done that. But so Craig believes that Beryl is his mother, but she clearly isn't, and it's Ruby. And then isn't Debbie a girl that he just sees in the street and then stalks her almost?
And then Andy and Craig are both after Debbie for a while.
And she has a horse, doesn't she?
Yeah.
And there's some. I mean, when I looked back through the synopsis for this episode, I'd completely forgotten about this storyline. But Debbie's horse has been overtrained and is going to be sent for slaughter or something. Although they call it the knackery.
Yeah.
Is that right? So rather than allow Debbie's horse to be slaughtered, they decide to try and rescue the horse, which they do. They go and find the horse, who's called Sugar, and Sugar becomes quite frightened and kicks out, and so kind of, I think the horse's hoof hits Craig on the head and knocks him out. So you've got Craig. Is Craig still alive, or has he been
in real life
or something? And
I can't remember if it was Andy, or I think it
was Andy, wasn't it?
But in real life, whoever got kicked got their arm broken. Because I listened to the commentary, and they were saying,
and they have to quickly write in Andy's got a broken arm in the next episode. So while they were filming that, Craig was the one that was meant to get the kick, but it was actually Andy that got kicked. And the actor, not the character, but the actor broke his arm, and then they had to put that in the story as well. So that's another part of the kind of plotline twist.
Also connected with the because Caroline's fallen on hard times. She's been living at David's, and she's sort of involved with Craig and Debbie quite a lot.
And we also must add that while Alison had been on probation and had met Ginny, Caroline has quite a rough time in prison, doesn't she? Because she's away for 3 months, and we don't get to see her in prison. But what we do find out afterwards, that she was terrorised while she was in there and was actually raped by one of the male guards, and already had claustrophobia, but is now. She's become quite a fragile character, hasn't she, Caroline? And I mean, we've got the whole story twist of finding out the kind of resolution to the Amanda story. Caroline, once released from prison, decides to try and find her daughter who's disappeared, Amanda. And sadly, they actually discover that Amanda's had quite a tragic ending.
Yeah.
In that she got involved with drugs and had become a prostitute, and sadly had been murdered or had an overdose or something. And then ended in quite sad circumstances. And Caroline has to go and identify the body, doesn't she?
But she has met Doug, who sort of owned the supermarket that where Craig was working, and she ended up working there too. But she was kind of cynically looking for a rich guy to date, so she could sort of.
And she meets Doug. Now, isn't the actor that plays Doug? I'm sure I've read that he was like a 1970s Australian pop heartthrob or something.
I think so.
He was like the David Essex of Australia in the 70s or the 60s or something. So. He's obviously like a former pop star who's become an actor. But I really liked Caroline and Doug together, and it is an on-off relationship, and it does have a few ups and downs, but I think they work really well together.
Yeah, and at the end of the season, they've fallen out, but they've also kind of got back together, and they're just about to leave the house where this lady knocks on the door and announces that she's an American lady.
She's Doug's wife.
And
which is like a real shock. So Caroline and Doug have just got back together, and it could all be off again.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Alison is breaking into the safe back at the Hamilton house, and when she opens the safe, a snake comes out and bites her. But But
what did you think of that?
Well, I'm just fully in love with the show by this point. I'm like, this is amazing. But I mean, it's ridiculous, but
it is a bit ridiculous. But she was warned that if she tried to break into the safe,
and Wayne's removed the phone from the office and also put so that the door sort of swings back and locks out from the outside.
So they're as bad as each other.
So she's trapped inside.
He set it up so that she's trapped inside the house, having been bitten by a snake. Meanwhile, she set it up so that he gets stranded on this desert island.
Although she doesn't know what's going to happen as badly as well, because Tick, he's mucking around with a knife and falls on it, and then they need medical attention. But Alison had arranged for the boat that dropped them off to leave, so they're stranded. So Wayne has to swim for help, and then just as he's swimming away, a shark comes out and chases him, and that's the end of the season.
And you just see this little shark fin popping up like a Jaws moment, and you just think, so they've had a snake bite and a shark.
Yeah, I believe it was something. I believe it was a fake. Listening to the commentary, it's a fake fin that's sort of attached to the boat that was filming the.
Yeah.
But I think
I'm sure it was a fake snake as well. I mean, they wouldn't allow you to put a snake in a safe and leave it, would they? So, bit of an interesting end of year cliffhanger there, and I suppose it sets it up nicely for the last season, doesn't it? The kind of Wayne and Alison battle.
Yeah.
Which, to be fair, the Wayne and Patricia thing has gone on for quite a few years, all by this point, hasn't it? And now Alison is Patricia, so it kind of just takes it to the next level, doesn't it?
But of course, another thing we haven't really mentioned, because it hasn't really featured in the end of season, is that Susan Palmer has come back into the show, and during the time that Glenn was on the show, there was all sorts of backstabbing between Wayne wanted to be with Susan, and Glenn and Susan were in love, but Wayne made sure that he was discredited, and then that was backwards and forwards, and it was quite an ongoing plot line right up until the end, although it even got to the stage where Susan sort of faked her own death. And I don't think, I'm not sure I realised at the time, but I think the actress playing Susan was effectively out of the series by the time but she comes back in the last episode. I hadn't quite taken in that she had actually left. I must have not noticed how much of a break there'd been since she'd last appeared, but
she was still on the opening titles.
Yes,
so
yeah. I think in her head, or at least in her contract, she was pretty much gone.
But I wonder if maybe if it had not been ended, because just as a point for the listeners, the last season isn't a full season because the show was actually axed. So it's not a full series. The last. Yeah, it's about the kind of last chunk of it. There's only about 50, 60 episodes.
Yeah, but they weren't showing it as often, so it still dragged. No, it didn't drag. Actually, no, it's a little bit longer because it was 868, and
right.
So it was about just under 100. But I think it's probably only shown. It wasn't shown as often, or maybe it was just shown once a week or whatever, and it lasted almost the whole of 87, but. They weren't showing it at as much speed.
So we haven't really got a cliffhanger at the end of this season, but it is in some. It's a resolution, isn't it, to a lot of the characters' storylines in this final series. So obviously Wayne didn't get eaten by the shark, and Alison did recover from the snake bite. So that's continued for some time, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And in these. What's the final couple of episodes, really? Craig and Debbie continue as a young couple, and there's all the kind of issues that they face. And he finds his father at some point, and she gets offered a job somewhere else, and he isn't working, and there's a bit of stuff going on. And they live together at Beryl's, but Beryl's quite clear that until they're married, they shouldn't be in the same room together. And you've kind of got that kind of story to it. Meanwhile, something's happened that I know when we've mentioned this before, you feel that that's quite a good resolution to it, but two of the characters have actually got together that were original characters in Beryl and Gordon.
Yeah, they're and Beryl's been in prison again, wrongly accused of shooting Wayne, but not fatally. But to be fair, she did say that she did it because she knew it was Susan who had shot him. But yeah, she'd been in jail, which is where she met Alison Thrope, Patricia's identical twin sister. So another one other than Margaret, called Pamela.
And this is one of the big. I mean, this is just like the end of season 1, where the rug gets pulled from underneath moments, isn't it? Because you've got, obviously by this point the viewing figures are dropped, and in an attempt to try and get a bit more interest in the show, they managed to talk the original Patricia actress to come back, didn't they?
Yeah.
But she's only in it for, she only comes back for something like 30 to 40 episodes, doesn't she?
Yeah,
so it's only for
as much as that, but yeah,
a short period of time.
She can't play Patricia because Patricia's now Alison, so she has to be. She looks like Patricia, plus a couple of years, like a couple of years older, but not much difference. And she's Pamela, and.
But it's not even the first time that they've done that, because you've literally only just had 6 or 7 months before Beryl being the same actress playing another character at the same time. And
there was also another Wayne, a character looked like Wayne about season 3 or 4.
Yeah, there is, isn't there? There's somebody who's the spitting image of Wayne that comes into it. I think his name's Gary. Yeah. But he's got a tattoo that Wayne doesn't have or something, and that's how it finally comes out. But yeah, basically Beryl's in prison, and everybody's talking about this really tough inmate called Pamela, and when Beryl sees who it is, it's Rowena Wallace playing another role. Mm-hmm. She's promptly released from prison. And what did you think of the scenes between Pamela and Alison?
I thought Pamela was a weak version of Patricia. She wasn't particularly exciting, really.
I thought the best thing about them bringing her back as an actress playing her twin sister was it was interesting to see the scenes that Pamela gets with the other characters, because by this stage, if you remember that Patricia is Alison, everybody's fed up with Alison and annoyed with her and angry with her and feels double-crossed by her. But nobody's like that towards Pamela. So you actually get to see it's almost like they're working with their ex-colleague, but in a different way. And I kind of like some of those scenes. I think they're quite well acted. You get little cameos you get Pamela and Beryl and Pamela and Fiona. And these are characters that would have hated each other. But because it's Pamela and not Patricia, you can almost see the two actors playing a very different dynamic. Yeah. And I think that works quite well.
You were saying that people are beginning to sort of tire of Alison, because the Pamela plot happens a month or two before the end of the show.
Yes.
So she's not involved in this final episode 972.
Yeah.
There's also another couple that come in of
Pamela's children.
Yeah. I've forgotten what they're called, but again, I think perhaps they would have done more with them, but then I don't quite know when the axe came in. So that I think they probably are in the last episode, but they never get masses of plots, because
by that stage it's pretty much coming to an end, isn't it? And I kind of think it was a bit unnecessary maybe to bring them in.
Yeah.
I don't really see what they add to it.
I think it was just maybe they were kind of thinking, it would be sort of like
Angela and John
all over again.
But it's never really developed, is it? But perhaps that's because, like you say, the end was within sight. So in the final episodes then, so we see a good resolution for Craig and Debbie after a bit of a turbulent up, down. And I think, does she go off to America for a while to do a job? She comes back, and I think, have they decided they're going to get married?
Yeah, I think so.
So that's kind of a happy ending for them.
Caroline and Doug are still together, and she's found out she's pregnant, but the baby may have health issues, but Doug is like, well, I'm going to be a father. That's amazing. Sort of.
And they really he doesn't know that she's pregnant, does he? And she really doesn't want him to have anything to do with the baby. And when she finds out from the test results that the child is going to be disabled, it kind of strengthens her resolve in not telling Doug and you know, I'll deal with this on my own. But quite clearly they are meant to be together. And when Doug finally does discover that he is going to be a dad, and you know, so what if the child's going to be ill or disabled? He doesn't care. Doug, being the businessman that he is, he reveals that he's invested his last few $100s or whatever into buying a fish and chip shop. And that's kind of how their story finishes. But I did want to just say, I don't know whether I just misunderstood this, but in the final scene with Doug and Caroline, he says to her, "Do you want fish and chips?" And she says, "No, I'm not hungry." And he was like, "Well, I've bought them anyway, but I've bought the business." And they turn round and you see this shop, but it's actually a fishmonger's. It's not actually a fish and chip shop. And I just wondered if maybe they couldn't find a fish and chip shop in the middle of Sydney to film outside or something. It's just, it's like they've kind of picked the wrong building.
Fiona's still around. She's running the mansion. Wayne's the sort of new owner, but Gordon has kind of insisted that Fiona be allowed to run it her way. And Andy has found out he has a baby, and he's going to help raise the baby. And
there's a bit of obviously Fiona doesn't think much of Andy by this point, does she? Because they've had a few fallouts, and I think Andy has done some pretty ropey stuff, usually at Wayne's instruction. And Fiona's not confident that Andy would make a good father, and I think there's an episode that ends with Fiona saying that she'll do all she can to make sure that Andy doesn't bring the child up. But in the end, it's resolved, and she manages to accept that he will make a good dad, and that he's the right person to bring the baby up.
Meanwhile, also in the last few months, Charlie has met a guy called Todd, who in this episode she marries in her garden, and a lot of the characters come together for that wedding. Also a character called Neville, who was a sort of love interest for Janice earlier in the show, has come back and has proposed to her. So Janice is going to be leaving sort of imminently after this wedding. So Fiona and Janice have some scenes together where they kind of admit they're going to really miss each other. A big change from how they were when they first met.
So the kind of the final scenes, the wedding is ending. Charlie and Todd have got married, and everybody's really happy. And I think, do we see Fiona go back to the guest house and this young couple arrive?
Well, that's the very last scene. So we should leave that one to the very end.
Yeah. And then Wayne is still at the party, and he's talking to, I think it's Pamela's daughter, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And he sort of brushes her off because guess who he's seen?
Susan. I can't remember why Susan comes back at that point.
So Susan's come back because Alison's rung her. Alison is by now lost everything. So what we've seen in also in these last few episodes is Wayne has made a list of everybody and how he's going to detach them from Alison, either by causing an argument with her or exposing that Alison's done something to rip them off. And he's ticked everybody off on the list, including Pamela's children. He's alienated them from...
And Charlie, her best friend, won't have a bar of her, as they say in Australia.
Yeah. So Alison really has nothing. So Alison rings Susan and asks her to come back to prove to Wayne that she's still alive or something. Is that right?
Yeah.
Or to kind of to show to Wayne that to kind of to kind of take the smirk off him that his wife is still alive.
Yes, Dealey, you come to join us. Come on
for the season ending.
Yeah.
Hello.
Well, one thing that should be said is that David, who had been in the show so long, although it had periods where he'd gone for 2 or 3 months, I think it was around the end of season 5,
he'd left, hadn't he?
He'd left, so he wasn't in the show anymore. But in one of the last scenes of the show, Alison's bankruptcy notice is seen in the paper by a mysterious person who locates her, knocks on the door, and it's David, and he's come to save the day. So David does appear in the last episode.
Yeah, and that was a really lovely way of ending the story, and you kind of think there is a bit much earlier in the show where Patricia loses everything. I think it's maybe the second time that David and Patricia get together, and she's lost everything. And he says, "Look, I'll help you, and we can rebuild our lives." And she then starts scheming and manipulating, and that's why it doesn't work out for them. But you kind of think by now she really has learned a lesson now, so you kind of know that she's not going to go back to that scheming and kind of skullduggery with people, because she really has lost it all. So that's a nice ending for them, isn't it?
But the last episode definitely, picks its side as to who the ultimate baddie is, because Alison does. She's had a bad time of it, but she gets a happy ending ultimately.
She does.
Compared to what could have happened. And it's Wayne who is the ultimate baddie, because he follows he sees Susan, follows her to the house, and then an argument starts, and
he grabs her, doesn't he?
He grabs her, and he says that she'll never leave him again, and Susan looks terrified. But that scene is slightly before the last scene. I think it's probably then it's the David and Alison scene, but then it finally cuts to
we switch back to Wayne standing in the house crying, basically, picking up the phone.
Yeah.
And Susan's lying dead on the floor.
Yeah. So we never see the fallout from that. We never see what Beryl or David or anybody makes of that. But there is one more scene, and that is a happy scene, but doesn't really relate to that scene with Susan and Wayne. And it's Fiona back at the boarding house, and a couple turn up, and the woman is heavily pregnant and gives birth to twins, and it comes full circle from episode 1.
And you even see a look on Fiona's face that she even is like, "Oh, good grief! I can't believe it's happened again." And I think the question she says to the guy is, "Did you want a daughter or a son?" Yeah. Well, congratulations, you've got both. Yeah. Which is exactly the words that she'd used, as you said in the kind of opening of it 5-6 years earlier. So that's it. That's the end of Sons and Daughters.
Yeah.
So which cliffhanger did you think was the best?
I mean, I do like the last episode. I do like, because not, sometimes shows spoil it with their last episodes, or but I don't really consider that a proper sort of end of season. It is a good conclusion for the show, and I felt we ought to discuss it. But I probably like the 1985 season cliffhanger with
that's my favourite as well.
With the
plane crash, and Fiona finds out she's got cancer, and Caroline's shoved under the stairs,
and Robert,
and stop the wedding.
Yeah, I wasn't sure, because we were talking about this beforehand. We did, listeners, we didn't know which each. I wasn't sure if Andy was going to go more old school, but a lot of people. This is why I find with Sons and Daughters, a lot of people on forums are very much into the early stuff and don't like it as it goes on. If I'm going to be a fan of a program, I have to pretty much like the majority of it. If I liked a show but then half of it I hated, I wouldn't be as big a fan of it, if you know what I mean. So I
think for me, there's some bits of the 1985 season that it's perhaps not quite as good for me, but I do think it's a really strong end of season. And the fact that Alison and James have been in a plane crash, and Wayne and Mary are getting married, and the brother and sister, and we've got Fiona's health crisis. I do think that's quite good, and I think they really went out for it, that series.
They've got a good act. They've cast well with James, Nick Tate. He's a good actor, and you can kind of see they're very different. But you can kind of believe that Gordon and him might. You could
believe, yeah, absolutely. They've both got that. It's not just the fact they've both got beards, and although I think as Gordon just got a moustache then, but they both got facial hair, and they're both similar kind of hair color and obviously different heights, but it does work really well. You can believe that they are brothers. Which did you think was the weakest of the cliffhangers? Incidentally,
I mean, season one's a bit low key for me, although it's important for the show. The shark one is a bit jumping the shark, but I also did enjoy that one. What about you?
I thought the worst one was the end of 1984. I just think Patricia going into surgery and thinking that she's going to die, and will Fiona marry Sergeant Adams, and Irene admitting that she was in love with David, but knowing that he still loves Patricia, she kept quiet. And the whole Roger Carlyle stuff, and the thing with Dr. Newman, that for me is the weakest out of all of them.
I do sort of like all that, the Roger Carlyle stuff, though. So I did sort of, I do. I know what you mean, but
as a cliffhanger, though, I think it's probably the weakest out of all of them.
Yeah, it's quite low key things. Although I suppose Mitch and Wayne with the "you've killed him" and all that sort of thing, that's a bit more active. But yeah, they sort of ramp them up season by season. But
I actually thought the end of the first series is actually my second favourite, because I just think that the first year is quite strong. I know you prefer the later series, but it's just such a twist. They built this up for 12 months. That David and Patricia are the parents of these twins, and I really like the way that they interplay. They move Angela to Melbourne, and John goes up to Sydney, and then it's just been a whole lie for the last 20 years. David wasn't their father anyway. And I just think that's such a good cliffhanger. That was actually my second favourite. But it has its downsides, because I think there's a lot of the start of season 2, the episodes with Martin Healy, and I find a lot of that is just not as well developed.
Yeah, and I got a bit confused, because they were living around the time Martin was there, they were living in this really sort of room that seemed to have no windows, and a part of the house. And then later on, they're living in a different sort of house, but I think it's supposed to be the same house, just a wing of it or something.
Yeah, it was almost, wasn't that house left to them? Isn't there a bit of a thing where it's revealed that Patricia had an affair while she was married to Gordon with this? I mean, it's old enough to be your granddad, isn't it? But Fiona had a relationship with him as well, and he dies and leaves Patricia his house in Melbourne.
Yeah.
And then I think when it comes out that the reason that Patricia's inherited this house is because she had an affair with this guy, that maybe contributes to why her and Gordon's relationship breaks down.
Yeah.
So it makes sense for her to just clear off, leave Sydney, and go back down to Melbourne, where she originally came from.
But a lot of these houses don't have clear views from the windows, because it's all studio, really.
And she'd only done one room up, hadn't she? But you're right. There's you've got those. I mean, there's quite a lot of episodes where does Margaret come to live with her, and then Patricia has a breakdown, and you've got Patricia up in the bedroom upstairs when Susan comes to care for her, and she's looking after her, and that doesn't feel like the house that Wayne and Amanda live in a few months later, even though in theory it's supposed to be the same house, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, Deals, what's your favourite scene?
Interesting.
Deals, you've seen quite a lot of Sons and Daughters. What did you make of it? You don't like to say. You like all of it, don't you, Deals? Andy, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And I have an idea about a future episode we could record, but I think I'll leave that till after we said goodbye and
okay,
leave it on a cliffhanger. Listeners, do check out Sons and Daughters if you like soap, if you like Australian soap. It's a nice little sort of. There's a lot of episodes, but you can easily find yourself whizzing through 5 or 6 in a night because they're only about 20 minutes, and they are at their most addictive. They are very watchable. So,
and I think as you probably have heard from our commentaries on the cliffhangers, it's not a series that's slow.
No.
There's always stuff happening, and characters 1 month can easily be in a very different place a month later. And there's lots of a lot of the reasons why the characters interact in the ways they do, we haven't touched on because that's not relevant to the cliffhanger. So there's a lot more twists and turns to the show.
We shall talk again soon. And
yes, I'm off to Brazil now for some plastic surgery.
We might not recognise Andy when he comes back, but more from me soon, listeners. And goodbye for now.
Goodbye. Bye.
Andy, I don't know if you'll be up for this, but I know one of your other favourite shows is Prisoner Cell of H. Would you be up for doing something similar to what we've done for Sons and Daughters?
Yeah, definitely. Aren't there more cliffhangers for Prisoner, though?
There are. We could always do it as a. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. We could always.
Definitely, I'll definitely be up for that. But it might have to be a 2-parter.
Yeah. We'll work it out.
There's a lot. I didn't realise there's a lot to talk about, isn't there?
Yeah, because it's difficult to explain quickly because so much has changed between seasons, and perhaps you don't even realise that until we started talking about it. That actually, gosh, this isn't easily explained in 2 words. It's characters who've got married to new people in that time,
and someone that was quite significantly the in a relationship with someone in 1 year, and this is why they've done the thing that they've done. That's not even relevant in the next year.
Yeah, whole massive plot lines have come and gone, like the whole Lee plot character who was. Yeah, Lee. You remember Lee, don't you, Dales?
I mean, we never even touched on Lee Palmer, did we? But there was very little involving Jill, for instance, at Cliffhanger. There was that one, but she was a massive
character.
A massive, yeah.
Of the younger characters, she stayed far longer than your Angela's and
actually,
John's.
her character holds a lot of the stories together and holds a lot of the characters together, because you've got her relationship with Jill. She has a bit of an on-off relationship with John. She also has a relationship with Wayne.
Yeah.
Then there's all the stuff with Terry.
Yeah.
And then the stuff with Brian, the Irish guy.
Oh, yeah.
And I just think she's quite a complex character. And
I mean, when she goes quite quickly.
I think it's quite sad that we didn't ever get to hear again about Jill, or it would have made sense. I mean, obviously it comes down to, do they want to bring people back, or do the actors want to come back? But it would have been nice to have seen Jill come back when Fiona has cancer.
Yeah, one of the few characters who came back was Rob for Beryl and Gordon's wedding. Was it Beryl and Gordon's, or was it somebody else's? But anyway, he comes back for a wedding.
He does, doesn't he?
And that's a rare return of an old character.
I kind of like the way that John and Angela refuse to come
conveniently
to come back again, because they don't want anything to do with their mother. But yeah, I mean, if they could have paid them, or the actors had been interested, it might have been interesting to have one final, or just to see how Alison would have got on with John and Angela.
Yeah.
Or even try to maybe had a scene where Alison maybe tries to build bridges with them, but they're just not interested in her.
Yeah, I don't know.
And they just tell her to get lost or something. I think that might have been interesting to see.
Ali Fowler was in Neighbours quite early on, so but I don't know what she was doing between finishing Sons and Daughters and Neighbours. I gotta go now. Bye. I want to go with you. Gotta go. Bye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Yes, goodbye.
Wow. Really? No kidding.
Thank you, darling. And you too. Bye-bye.
This show is part of the Pride 48 network. Find more shows over at pride48.com.
Oh dear. What's going on now? Oh, it's the Shy Life podcast. Let's go.
I have a voice. I have a voice.
You have a voice.
You have a voice. We have a voice.
We have a voice.
Unique voices in podcasting.
UnivazPods.net.
That is so cringe, oh my god. You're a man of culture as well.
I'm actually quite surprised that we've took that long to talk through them all.
Yeah, although we probably didn't start recording until the first
about 20 past.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm sure it'll only be about. You're looking forward to hearing all the stuff you didn't hear, dear.
I still think that whole segment with Beryl and the baby, where let me get this right. So does Lee kidnap baby Robert?
Yeah.
And runs off with him, and then isn't there a car crash and they think that's why baby Robert's dead? No, it's that woman, isn't it? Isn't there a mad woman? Doesn't someone kidnap Robert and gives the baby to a mad woman who then kills herself? And people think that she had Robert with her in the car, and everybody's like, Beryl, Robert's dead, you've got to accept he was kidnapped, and then the woman who kidnapped him crashed a car and he's dead, but he's not, because she dropped the baby off didn't she drop the baby off at the orphanage, and it's Lee that picks it up and I can't remember, but it's awful. It's more the fact that the woman drop the baby off, but Lee picks her up and takes the baby to the
because she says
to the orphanage.
But doesn't she at some point she doesn't she say that the baby is her little brother or something? Or
yeah. Because then the woman who runs the orphanage recognises Lee and says, "You're the woman that abandoned the baby."
Mm.
And knowing that you're Beryl's niece, it was Beryl's baby, wasn't it?
Mm. Mm.
That's terrible.
By which point, that's why Lee goes to
prison.
To prison.
For kidnapping Robert.
But
who is it in the first place that kidnaps Robert? Is it something to do with Ross Newman?
I can't remember who tells.
It's a man that does it. It's not Wayne, is it? It's a male character that orders it, and the baby goes to this woman who's a bit deranged, and she then drives off and commits suicide, but she's actually dropped Robert off on Beryl's doorstep before she does it. But Beryl doesn't know that because Lee intercepts the baby and snatches it and goes off with it. And then Beryl's left thinking that her baby's dead, and it's just. But then when she sees Robert at the orphanage and realises that he's not dead, but nobody will believe her. It's awful.
And then it just gets worse as well. What with that family next door who lose everything pretty much.
That's. Is it the O'Brien family?
Yeah, because
I don't think they worked really, did they?
No, because they lose the son, they lose the father,
and then the daughter goes off to Sydney and spends time with Wayne, doesn't she?
She also spends time with Roger Carlyle.
That's right, yeah, because she comes into the opening titles, doesn't she, Katie?
Yeah.
Which I found that quite strange because she's not that big a character.
Yeah, and quite late on, because the father died of a brain tumour or something.
Yeah.
The brother gets
badly burnt and he dies.
Yeah.
Is it Jim?
Jim. Yeah, he's is he in prison as well, or is he certainly?
Yeah, he plays he plays the biker that Mrs. Reynolds goes off with.
Yeah.
He's a priest, isn't he?
Yeah, that's right.
And he's at the edge of Rita's bikie gang, but he's not quite one of them. But he's a bikie, but he's not quite part of the gang. But they respect him, don't they? Because he's a priest or something.
Yeah.
He does the funerals for them, doesn't he?
Yeah. I quite like Jim.
I think I'm going to have to watch Sons and Daughters again because I've only ever seen it all the way. Did it take me about a year and a half to watch it?
Something like that. But then you didn't have all the boxes, so you had to wait.
Yeah,
to be released.
I've
kind of paused with the last. I've paused around the end, around episode 900. So, but then that's partly because I had seen those last 100 or so episodes on YouTube. But so I will whiz through the last few discs.
Actually, the way that some of the female characters are treated in Sons and Daughters is really poor, and I don't know how much of that is. Are they trying to show how tough life is for women, or is it just? I mean, using rape as a plot device to draw a wedge between Jill and Fiona, and Fiona's like, you can't. That's going to be my grandchild. You can't kill it. That's like an abortion story. They wouldn't get away with that now, would they?
No.
Or would they? I don't know.
Because I know that there was a woman took over the producing the last couple of seasons, and she's not very she's not very popular because. But I don't know. But I mean, I actually think I didn't like. I wish they'd kept Irene, but I think Barbara had almost done everything they could with Barbara. She went. It always used to annoy me that she was very strong, but
then she wasn't.
And she wasn't strong, and then it was a bit
with Barbara. They're almost like constantly flip flopping her, aren't they? It's like 1 minute she's really strong and really tough, and she'll stand up to Wayne and tell him what an idiot he is, and how, you know, if you hurt your father again, I'll kill you, and that kind of stuff. But then the next minute she's like having a breakdown. Gordon doesn't really love me, and Gordon's looking at other women, and you just think, Barbara, 1 minute you're really strong, and you're really confident, and you're really forthright, and then few weeks later, you've like lost it. It's almost like bipolar, like up and down, but it doesn't quite make sense.
And the weird thing is, they got rid of Irene. And then they quite soon afterwards cast a new character who was a doctor. So they obviously needed a doctor. So they didn't get rid of Irene. Although when I rewatched it, I did have a bit of a crush on the Doctor when he was in it. But so I'm glad he was in it. But I did kind of think
it is that flip flopping with the female characters, though. They can't decide whether they're, and to some extent they're trying to do it with Caroline as well, where she's quite strong. I mean, she copes really well with Amanda's death, but then loses it over she's claustrophobic. But I think it's probably worse with Barbara, because with Patricia it works. 1 minute she's a bitch, but then you see actually she's quite vulnerable underneath it, and I think that's played quite well in the first year. I mean, when David thumps her and says, "If you bloody come in here, I'll flatten you," and she's left sobbing in the street, I thought that was quite good, because it just shows she's. And it's a bit like Alison at the end, where she's lost everything. They're all having a party. You're not invited, love. And it's pretty much how it ends, isn't it? Everybody's having a good time, and you're stuck in some motel with nothing. So I like that. I like how they resolve it. It's like the same thing. It's repeating to the same character, even though it's a different actor playing them. But I just think with Barbara, it just that flip flopping doesn't work.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work as well.
I wouldn't have wanted the show to have been like year one all the way through, which some people seem to. I don't know how you can. I don't quite know where it is that they start to dislike it. Or I often find I'm the one particularly supporting the later seasons.
You know what would have been better? Not to have killed Margaret off. Forget Pamela. What would have been better was, once Rowena Wallace had left, they should have just left her. They shouldn't have brought her back. What they should have done was not killed Margaret off, and then when Beryl gets to prison, Margaret's there in prison, and they could have brought Margaret back into it. Because that would have been enough to be Alison's sister. Because Patricia already had a sister, and they could have easily brought the Margaret character back, maybe a different actress, but like to see how, now that she's Alison, how does she get on with Margaret? And because Charlie had got a memory of Margaret, hadn't she? So it would have. I don't know. I think they could have done it that way, but obviously they were wanting to bring Rowena Wallace back to get the viewers to watch again, weren't they? But.
When they kill off Karen, she gets pushed off that bridge and rolls down into the gully.
and isn't her body there for quite a while, for a few episodes, kind of like decomposing in the river?
Yeah. Was it her son who got caught up in that bomb? Was it her son who ended up in the wheelchair after a bomb? There was a wheelchair which had a bomb in it, which was meant for somebody else.
That's right. Yeah, I forgot about that.
That was something to do with that army guy and his diaries, probably, or it might have been to do with because there was that vengeful son who I can't remember if he's involved.
Yes,
he's responsible.
He's
for
the son of is it Colonel Wainwright or Colonel Bainbridge? I could never remember.
Whichever one they decide is they go on a picnic. And he sort of chases them down. But that's separate to the bomb. Okie dokie.
All right then. Well, lovely to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you.
And Dealey as well.
Yeah, and Dealey. We've got a big explosive cliffhanger at the end of episode 750 we're building up towards. But,
what's going to happen, or can't you tell me?
Ick the alien's got a bomb inside him. So,
wow. Is there going to be a siege?
We'll have a siege at some point, I'm sure. But
I love a siege. I love a siege.
Yeah. Okie dokie. I'll better go and yeah. Bye for now, sisters.
Goodbye. Goodbye. See you later, Paul.
Yeah, you take care. Bye for now.
You too. Bye. Bye.
Paul, that was a whopper.
No, stop it. I think that was a wonderful episode by Paul, don't you?
Oh my God. I sure do. Boy, I'm telling you, I really do. No, that was good. All right, dear. No, seriously, that was a great episode.
No, kitty, kitty, kitty. Purr, kitty, kitty, kitty. Oh, I love Dee.
This is just the weirdest thing I've ever heard.
Okay, let's just shut this one out. Get it going.
720.
If we jump on them,
then we're on to season 6. I'm just going to eat my dessert. So I'll just
right. So again, as always, there's a lot of new characters coming in the next series.
Et voilà.